Support comes from the Missouri Forest Products Association, saluting Earth Day on April 22nd with an ongoing commitment to help offset carbon emissions with sustainable harvesting of Missouri forests. Details at choosewood.com.
This is St. Louis on the Air from St. Louis Public Radio. I'm Elaine Cha. You don't have to be religious to call a prayer, like that moment of, please let me get this job, or please let the test come back okay, maybe even, please make my boss nice to me today. Of course, I don't have any trouble with that one. Now, those are moments of asking often brought about by a place, like a classroom or a waiting room. For St. Louisans Ken and Beverly Jenkins, their place of appeal was a parking lot, and not just a little square of spots for a few cars. It was the parking lot of a long-abandoned strip mall in Dellwood, the site of a Schnuck supermarket on West Florissant Avenue almost 2 decades ago. But the two pastors saw something there, something that could be. It took 10 years and raising $20 million, but last September, that parking lot filled up with people. They were celebrating the grand opening of the R&R Marketplace, a community and economic hub serving North St. Louis County. And it is not done growing yet. To talk about the marketplace and what it means for the community, I'm joined by the two pastors who prayed over that parking lot. Ken Jenkins, Beverly Jenkins, welcome to St. Louis on the Air.
Thank you.
Thank
We're
you.
very, very
Good
glad
to
to
be
be
here.
here.
Now, you both are pastors at the Refuge and Restoration Church, which you founded together as a couple. And intentional partnership in community is at the heart of your story. So before we get to the marketplace, tell us about how your becoming a pair led to your church and your nonprofit. Let's start with you, Beverly.
Okay. Well, I do need to start first because his version of the story is very different than mine. So let me do
Relatable.
that. Yeah, let's do that. So actually, his brother, Ken's brother, was he thinks he was my boss, but he wasn't. But he was working at the same store location that we were working at. We worked for Circuit City, and so
okay.
we had not met each other, even though we worked for the same company. Jerome walked in one day and was like, you need to meet my brother. And I was like, oh my goodness, please no, let's not do that. And so at any rate, he set us up to meet and we went on one date and never separated. We were engaged in about 6 weeks and got married that same year. And we've been together now 31 years and married 30.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
And this Jerome that we're talking about is not just any Jerome. He's a very important connection to community, right?
Yes.
Yeah, Ken.
Yeah, so Jerome is my younger brother, and he and his wife, Kathy, owns Kathy's Kitchen. Mm-hmm. And so he thinks he's more famous than I am.
Okay.
He is.
Maybe this interview will change things. And neither of you were raised in the church, but you started attending services, right, because of your relationship, Ken?
You know, we weren't raised in the church necessarily, but we decided when we made the decision to get married that probably it would be beneficial for us to start going to church if we were going to survive in marriage. And so that's kind of what our thought process was way back then.
Mm-hmm.
I love that. Survive in marriage. I
Survive.
love it.
Yeah.
Yes.
And you talked about Circuit City.
Yeah.
So you were not pastors then.
No.
How did that happen?
Yeah, so we became a part of this wonderful church in the city called Union Tabernacle, and we became youth pastors at that time. At that time, in the Baptist church, they were not licensing or ordaining women into ministry. So I was a youth director, and then Ken was the youth pastor. And then our pastor woke up one day and was like, hey, I think this young lady needs to do something greater. And so he says, let me ordain you. And so I ended up ordained with my husband in ministry at the same time out of that same Baptist church. So
Right.
that's where we started.
And that brings us to something very, another very important moment in your lives and relationship. It was about 20 years ago, and you both were youth pastors and discussing the concept of a marketplace ministry. Ken, what does marketplace ministry mean? Is it like tent making?
Well, I'm going to refer that to Beverly because she was the one that started talking to me about it, and I was opposed to it in the beginning.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, well, it's a concept that now has gotten a lot of traction. Back then, when we were talking about it, it was not a common phrase at all. So marketplace ministry was really about doing business even as the church in the marketplace. The church was really known for being mostly just about the church and not necessarily about economic development or things that affect the community in that way. It was like this was our house and this is what we do here. And so the concept really came from, really for me, it was really from Jesus when he says that he was in the marketplace and this parable about I piped and no one danced and I mourned and there was nobody mourned, but he was like I was there in the marketplace. And so it was the concept of like how do we get into the marketplace and why should we not be in that arena? That the church should be a catalyst for owning and for celebrating or making way for creating pathways for community to be able to expand.
Right. So Ken, you said that originally this was not an idea you were down with. What is it that sort of brought you over to the side of we should be doing this and we should do it together?
So we were always in the corporate workspace. I was a headhunter. Beverly also worked in workforce development as a consultant. And so we were doing these things, while in church, but sort of separately. And then they began to merge. So we were helping people get jobs. We helped people get off drugs, and we helped the homeless. We helped men who had been incarcerated. We did family counseling. So we were doing all of these things. And as this concept began to be downloaded, particularly in Beverly, we began to see the impact that it could have if these things were co-located in one space to be able to impact community in a real transformational way.
Mark, as far as the way that things were looking, Beverly, you were talking about the scripture in which there is that marketplace. But in your imagination, what literally did the marketplace look like? Did you have it in your mind?
Yeah, I think it was really interesting because it really started from a seed of driving down the road in the inner city, and there were a bunch of kids on the street, and they were just playing. They weren't really they weren't doing anything. They were just walking down the street, and I was like, who's praying for them? Who has their best interests at heart? And I know their parents love them, but what in community is available for them to reach into and to then have this upward mobility? So yeah, there was always a picture of what does that look like for us, and what is our responsibility in that as other humans towards other humans. And so it wasn't necessarily about brick and mortar at that time when it first began. It was a seed about people. It was just like, hey, how do we serve people better from this standpoint of how they can receive what they need to become the citizens that they would like to be in this world together.
Yeah. Let's go to the parking lot we described in the intro. How is it that you came to focus on this particular abandoned mall, which is located at 10148 West Florissant Avenue? Ken?
So literally, my mom and dad lived around the corner. They're deceased now, but they lived around the corner. So I'm not originally from St. Louis. My parents are, and so they moved. We grew up in Chicago, Gary, Indiana. And when my dad retired, he happened to move to Dellwood. And so we would drive by and we watched the disinvestment. We watched Snooks close. We watched the other businesses leave. And so literally that was a daily drive for us. And so we would drive by and Bev and I would discuss, this would be a great place to do all the things that we were already doing, have it in one place, co-located to provide these services. So it was just probably a daily, almost weekly conversation where we would talk about it, and then we started the process of going on the lot and praying.
Right. I'm talking with Ken and Beverly Jenkins. They're married pastors who are the co-founders of Refuge and Restoration Church and also the co-founders of R&R Marketplace in Dellwood. So those parking lot prayers, what was in them, Beverly?
Yeah. Oh my goodness. There's so many things. I don't know if we have time, but there was. We really were praying for the resources. We were saying, God, how do we do this? You've downloaded this vision into our hearts. How do we perform this? How do we do this? And so people were gathering with us. Some people would stop by the parking lot to pray on their own without us. They didn't, they knew that this was something that we were asking for. So they would come on their own and pray for that. But one particular day, we just simply walked around the building, I think 10 times. We weren't considering it like a Jericho or anything like that. We just were like, hey, let's just by faith, let's walk the property and put our feet on the ground in every single section of that area and believe God. At that time, that was when the unrest was happening, and the police were patrolling that particular area at that time. And it was a mandate of everyone not to be outside. So we were outside, kind of breaking the rules just a little bit, right?
Yeah.
But the police came and they said, oh, keep doing what you're doing. You're praying, keep going. And so they left us out there to pray.
So eventually, after raising $20 million, no small feat, last fall, you got to see your dream come true. That was the grand opening of R&R Marketplace. I mean, how is it that you went from praying in a lot to a $20 million development, Ken?
It's a miracle. And so, literally, that was the prayer. We're saying, God, if this is going to happen, you have to bless us. You have to do this. And so we haven't completely raised all the 20. We raised quite a bit.
Okay.
And so we are completing phase 1 now. Phase 2 will begin. So phase 1 is the bank, the Early Childhood Learning Center, the co-working space, the Workforce Development Center. You saw the grand opening with the pharmacy and the Behavioral Health Care Center. All of those things are phase 1. Phase 2 will be the church, black box theater, commercial kitchen, community office space. And so, and literally the best answer I can give you about the way it was done is it's through what we call, I've been saying this word, relational transformation. God just kept sending people into our lives. The more we prayed, the more people we met, the more people came on board and had a heart to be a part of this, had the heart to give. And so it was really daily sharing the vision, talking to people in prayer.
So what is the relational transformation that we are seeing now, Beverly, as part of phase 1?
Yeah, so the transformation that's taking place that you're seeing is people coming together, making decisions that this is necessary, that this is needed. So you saw, just like what Ken was saying a minute ago, is that there were people that we would pray about meeting. We were like, hey, it'd be great if we could meet these people. Or we had all these collaborative partners that we were like, hey, it'd be great if we could talk to them about. The whole goal of this was not for us to be an island, but for us to that's what the marketplace is all about. It's about reaching in to community. Community has a say in what they want. And then partners have a say in how they deliver those things. And so we just met with anybody that would meet with us. If you saw our calendar in 2017 to probably 2000 and, well, maybe to today.
Yeah.
It's filled with appointments, hours back to back to back to back of people that were just saying, hey, we just want to share the vision with you and see where you fit in. If there's, and we call it God partners. We're like, hey, if you feel like this is something that you can jump into, we wanted you. And so, and we still do. We feel the same way.
And so very specifically, what is in the center? Can you kind of talk a little bit about that? Can you give us a little more detail about what is now in the center and the 2 new additions?
Sure. So the original vision is a 5-pillar model that had to be there. These 5 things had to be there. This is the things that God had downloaded into Beverly. She wrote in her journal, and we prayed and talked about. So it was the church. It was a necessity to have the church because in our community, particularly in the Black community, no matter what your problem is, people show up at the church. And so from the church, we have the Early Childhood Learning Center to provide exceptional care for our children and really deal with issues of trauma and some of these social behaviors that are impacted by this trauma. Entrepreneurship. We have a ton of entrepreneurs in our community. So we had to have an entrepreneur center co-working space where we could build capacity around entrepreneurs. Workforce development. Providing not just jobs, but career pathways that would be transformational. We have pathways and training in geospatial, IT, healthcare, trades, and others where we're doing it on purpose. And, of course, addressing the soft skills. And then the banking and finance piece. Access to capital is huge. And so finding the right banking partner, which is Midwest Bank Center, had a chance to really meet them. They walked alongside of us. And so the other tenants, like ARCA, the Behavioral Healthcare Center, and the pharmacy, they were sort of organic. They came after, and we wanted tenants that would align with our mission and vision. And so that's where you see these specific things on purpose, co-locating these services to really address the needs that we identified in our community.
Now, Beverly, earlier you were talking about the unrest.
Yeah.
And this strip mall and the parking lot where you dreamed of something better was just down the street from where 18-year-old Michael Brown Jr. was shot and killed by Ferguson police officer Darren Wilson in 2014. And protesters marched up and down West Florissant Avenue for weeks. How did that impact the mission that you were in the midst of working on?
Yeah. It's really interesting that you asked that, because we started this mission before that took place. And how it impacted it is that it made it more alive than ever. It made it more necessity, much more of a necessity. It was like, wow, this is really what is needed in community. All of the areas that we touch affect every single social determinant of health. And so we were like, it was almost as if like it was downloaded, like when Ken says miraculous, like that really is how it feels to us, is that, wow, this is an answer to community that community's been crying out for. And we are going to be able to birth this in a place that needed it now more than ever. And so that's how we saw it, is that it's an answer to prayer.
Yeah.
That's what it was.
Well, and as we wrap here, Ken, we began this conversation talking about prayer. When you're in that parking lot now, what is it that is in your mind and in your heart? And have the prayers changed?
They haven't changed, but I think one of the things that's in our heart and mind now is that we want people to see that everything is truly possible by faith. When you believe God, you can do anything. And we talk about a community where it's been written about a lack of hope, but that's not the case. People needed to see it. And so we call it the reality of the manifestation of the love of God. This is really what it looks like when people come together and co-locate people, not just services, but people. We can do anything. And so it's the same prayer, the same faith, the same belief, not just for ourselves, but for everybody that's in our community.
And if I could jump in on that, I really wanted to say that too. It's just an additional thing too, is that most places are looking for areas or way that they can serve the people, but we felt like that the people were already the jewel. They were already the brilliance that was in the community was already there, and so we're there to open the access or the opportunity for them to shine even more.
And then very briefly, how will you know in a year from now that what you're doing is a success?
Yeah. Well, we say this all the time, that if our impact is not making more impact, then we have not been successful. So we want the people that we're impacting to keep creating impact. And so that will spread. Once that spreads and it keeps spreading, then we'll know we've done our job.
Yeah. Ken and Beverly, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you.
Thank you for having us.
This episode was produced by Emily Woodbury.
Audio engineering and podcast design by Aaron Dorr.
Our executive producer is Alex Hoyer.
St. Louis on the Air is a production of St. Louis Public Radio. Understanding starts here.
St. Louis on the Air proudly supports local artists by using music from Life Creative Group.
Do you find yourself regularly listening to episodes of St. Louis on the Air? Suggest us to a friend you think might enjoy our conversations. And leave us a review and rating on Apple Podcasts on the App Store. It's the simplest way to help people discover our show. Thanks.
St. Louis Public Radio is a member-supported service of the University of Missouri St. Louis.
Support comes from the Missouri Forest Products Association, saluting Earth Day on April 22nd with an ongoing commitment to help offset carbon emissions with sustainable harvesting of Missouri forests. Details at choosewood.com.